All right, we are going to jump right into the case study. So, this is a fun one. There's lots of differing opinions this week. And this is a case study that I have done a lot of research on, both at looking at the ethical codes as well as talking to a lot of others in my professional community. So, I wanted to go over a couple things really quickly, as some of y'all mentioned this in your posts. First of all is the importance that the therapist in the case study mentioned that he or she is a person-centered therapist. The reason that this is important is that a person-centered therapist, as many of y'all know, is going to be a type of therapist that views the client as the expert of their life. The therapist is going to be the expert of the process of counseling, but the client is going to be the expert to their life. And so this is a very different approach than earlier psychological approaches where the therapist was viewed as the expert of the client's life. And the reason that this is so important, and this is very much where modern psychology is heading to, is that essentially we as therapists are to encourage the clients to do whatever they believe is right. Okay, so it's not our job, again, to be telling them what they're supposed to do, right or wrong, but rather to present options to help them process through what the potential consequences, both positive and negative, could be. So that's why it's important that they mentioned that he or she is a person-centered therapist. Also, I just wanted to hit one other point, and that is to just basically discuss the overarching knowledge that the counselor has already obtained informed consent and given the confidentiality speech, and the client is aware of what the limits of confidentiality are. You'll notice throughout this that it might not specifically say that the confidentiality limitations have been acknowledged, but you can assume that any therapist who is licensed or who is in the licensure process is going to know that as soon as a client steps into their office for the first time, one of the first things that they talk about is confidentiality. And just so you guys know how important this is, of course, I'm a therapist, and so I give that speech to clients all the time when I receive new clients who come into my office. But I am a client of a therapist, and I know that even though they know, I know what confidentiality limitations are. Anytime I've started with a new therapist, they have always made a point to, of course, let me know what the limits of confidentiality are, informed consent, because that is our ethical duty. So you can assume that that has been also given. So, the case study. All right. The short answer to this question of if the therapist is required or should they talk to the school about these stolen keys of their client, and essentially the short answer is that no, the therapist is not required to let the school know that the student has taken the keys. The therapist is also not responsible for making the student take the keys back. So I know that this kind of is not going to be easy for some people to comprehend, but that is the short answer, and we'll kind of go into and explain it. Now, just a quick side note is that your best friend in a case like this, or any case really, is going to be excellent documentation. If your client were to get caught and quote-unquote threw you under the bus because they said you knew, it would be important to have this well documented, that you had informed your client of the consequences to his behavior, and that the client was of cognitive ability to understand what this meant and continued to choose that inappropriate behavior. Additionally, this is the type of documentation that would be necessary in case the client's case went to court. So this case is clearly a moral dilemma rather than an ethical dilemma. And many of you have indicated that this really is a moral dilemma. Many of you said that you felt it would be your duty to let the school know about this client of yours. However, what's important to note is that these actions, the stealing of the keys, does not actually fall within the limits of confidentiality, and you would definitely be putting your neck on the line if you chose to inform the institution. What's important to recognize here is the difference really between a moral dilemma and an ethical dilemma. I just lost my place. Sorry about that. In this case, because there are no ethical violations that have taken place, the counselor does not have the ethical right to inform the school. Now, I recognize that this can be a tough thing to comprehend, as there are actually two seemingly right choices here: the need to keep the client's information confidential and the need to let the school know of the crime that's been committed. These are both right choices. However, at the end of the day, you will need to do what is ethically right as indicated by the law rather than your moral preference. Now, a quick side note again, a lot of us assumed that this was a school counselor that the client was seeing. And so I did ask somebody on the discussion board, would it make a difference if this was not a school counselor, if this was just a therapist that the client had decided to go see? And really what's so interesting is many of y'all shifted your answers, that if this was a therapist outside of the school, there wouldn't necessarily be the need to tell. And so I just wanted to let you know that right there should shed light on, even if you are a school counselor, on what the ethical appropriateness would be. Now, it's always important to remember, and I've stressed this many times before, that it is not our job to push an agenda with our clients. Sometimes it's really nice when things are cut and dry. Like in the case of abuse, we are ethically obligated and mandated as a mandated reporter to not hold this type of information confidential. But when we do have a choice, it can become very difficult. This is why it's important to let our job as a therapist be a non-biased approach as we help the client explore all the possible consequences, both positive and negative, and ultimately trust them to make the decision that they feel is best. So in order to kind of further demonstrate this, I wanted to give you guys two different cases that I've actually either known about or that I've had as clients. The first one is the case of a young man that I started seeing probably about a year and a half or so ago. And he had been in therapy with a school counselor, and through that counseling process, it was made known that this client was so depressed that he was considering suicide. At that point, it was very ethical for the counselor to ensure that all safety precautions be taken. And because part of the trigger for this client to kind of increase his suicidal thoughts and planning was the overwhelmingness of his school load, it was required that he actually take a break from school, take like about a semester off, and receive some more intensive therapy, which is why he came to me, before he would be allowed at the school. That was ethical because of his intent to harm himself and his ability to do so. So the school had to take all necessary precautions in order to make sure that he was being taken care of. Okay, so that would be a situation in which confidentiality can be breached, or there's a limitation in confidentiality, and the client's is then dealt with accordingly. So in the above case, you'll notice that it is appropriate for the school to take action. Confidentiality is not breached because of the clear ethical code and limit of confidentiality. So in many ways, the case study that you read, again, is more of a moral dilemma rather than an ethical one. The next case I want to talk to you about is in regards to a pastor. And he is actually, this is a case that I consulted on. This is not my direct client. This was a pastor of a smaller town, and he had a bigger church in the smaller town. Because of the size of the town, there was only one therapist at that time in the town, and this pastor had chosen to go to this therapist. All the while, one of the things that he was discussing in therapy was the fact that he was having an affair. He was cheating on his wife with somebody else who worked at the church. So this therapist also went to the church of this pastor, and so all of a sudden he's sitting there on a Sunday morning, the therapist is, knowing what the pastor is doing, knowing the double life that he's leading, but unable to say anything, because this was not something that was an ethical dilemma. There was no confidentiality that was limited in this point or at this point. So this is definitely a moral dilemma in that the therapist was directly against his client's actions, but he did not have the ethical duty to release any sort of a statement or breach any sort of confidentiality, even though he did not personally and morally agree with his client, the pastor's actions. Now, we could say that the pastor was clearly manipulating. Maybe he was using his position as a pastor to woo women and to get them into his office. One could say that that is harmful to others. However, it's important to note here that the harm is actually subjective. This is, again, I'm going to say it many times, this is a moral dilemma. But a moral dilemma does not mean that confidentiality needs to be breached or limited, even though you might not like the actions of that person, whoever the client is, and you could see how it negatively could impact the client and the people whose lives they're involved in. This type of behavior is not a reason that confidentiality should be limited. So again, there we see the difference between an ethical dilemma and a moral dilemma. So I wanted to quickly go over what mandated reporting is, because this is something that has come up both in our group discussion board and will continue to come up throughout this class. In our case study, it's important to note that you are not a mandated reporter. Okay? Mandated reporter is used in terms for abusive situations, which would be physically, verbally, sexually, emotionally abusive and harmful situations. You are a mandated reporter when you know of or you suspect abuse of a child. So most paid and volunteer employees at churches, schools, parachurch ministries, community centers, daycares, they're all mandated reporters, in addition to therapists, doctors, anybody in the medical, mental health field. And technically, as an adult human being, you're a mandated reporter in abusive and harmful situations. Nowadays, abuse is something that is at the forefront of the news, of our culture, and of our own awareness, and it's important to recognize that despite your degree, there is an ethical obligation to report abuse. But I did want to go over a couple situations in which you would not be mandated to report abuse. The first situation would be if the person who reported the abuse, or there's a suspicion of them being abused, is an adult over the age of 18 who is capable of taking care of themselves, making decisions, etc. While it's true that they might be in a highly manipulative situation, our job in that case is to encourage them to report the abuse themselves and walk through that process with them. But because they are an adult and they have the ability to make that call, they have to be the ones to do so. The second way that you would not be mandated to make a report is if you did not have enough information about the abuser. For instance, if a teen tells you that they're being abused, but they're not going to let you know who did it and give you no other sorts of information, where it happened, or other pieces of information that would clearly indicate who is abusing them, you would not be able to report this. It would be wise for you to document it so that if the teen later comes back and gives you more information, then you would have documented notes already on why it wasn't reported previously and why you are reporting it now. But you can't necessarily make a call to Child Protective Services to say, hey, I know of abuse going on, and leave it at that. That's the hard part. But if you do know of or suspect abuse happening, it is important that you handle it appropriately. So I wanted to go over a few steps of what it's like to appropriately handle abuse or when you suspect abuse. If it is abuse of a child and the child would not be in further danger by telling their parent or guardian that you are making the phone call to CPS, then it's important to involve the parents or guardians in knowing what the child informed you of and what you will do in order to support them through this process. If you inform the parent that their child is being abused by somebody who's not really in that immediate proximity or an immediate threat to their child, and they indicate that they would like to make the phone call to CPS, they would need to do it in your presence so that you can confirm and document that the call was made. And I know I've had parents do this where they wanted to make that call. And what I've done is I've actually dialed the number on my phone and given them my phone to use to make sure that the call is going through to the appropriate source and that you are there witnessing that call being made. That way you have done your ethical duty. However, if the child would be in imminent danger by you reporting the abuse, you would also need to make a police report so that the child is protected. You would document this with CPS when you called them after the police report. So you'd make the police report and then you would call CPS. If you're working for a community agency, you will want to make sure to follow their protocol for reporting abusive situations. And it's probably going to be similar to what I just said, but there's also going to be additional steps as far as informing your supervisor and documenting it within your company's standard protocols. You're also going to want to make sure that you give the appropriate referrals and support to the families and different family members for this difficult time. It's your duty as a therapist to ensure the well-being of the client, and this could look like you continuing to see them as your client. However, if the person or family chooses to end services, then your duty would be to provide them with a list of referral sources and make sure to document that this has been done. So, the question has arisen in light of the Code of Ethics regarding confidentiality being limited when there is potential harm to the client or another individual. While harm might be a subjective term, for the sake of ethics and confidentiality, harm is considered to be in correlation with physical harm and abusive situations. It's important to remember that even though your client, in our case study, is giving information to other students about the test, which many of you consider to be harmful, his fellow students are also taking that information from him, indicating that they have a choice in the matter. At any point, a student could refuse this information or turn your client in. So, hopefully that gives you all a better idea of just how that case study kind of pans out, what your moral dilemma is, what an ethical dilemma is, and what you as a therapist are required to do in terms of confidentiality and reporting. So really quickly, I would love to give you all a resource and get ready for week 4. This resource I'm very excited about. This is something that I use with many of my clients. It technically would be called a personality test, but I call it a spiritual journey, and it is called the Enneagram. This is actually a textbook, and I'm going to go ahead and send you all a link to take the free Enneagram test. Now, this isn't necessarily like a Myers-Briggs personality test where they give you your 4 letters and INFJ, and kind of give you the description, and you kind of go, okay, well, now what? This is actually a different type of personality test in that it really encourages and growth and challenges you in many specific ways that are meaningful to your personality type. So this is going to talk about what you look like in health and under stress and different things that you might struggle with, different vices, different virtues, areas to grow, things to notice. This is absolutely one of the best tools that I have ever come across. So again, I'm going to send y'all a link to take a free test. And I would just encourage you, if you're at all interested in learning more about yourself and having this as a tool for how to help you identify with your clients, this is something that can be of great use. So again, self-awareness, like we've talked about, is so huge. And I will just say on a very personal level that the Enneagram has been one of the most influential sources in my own life personally, not just professionally. After going through it, I did this one summer. I took some time and really kind of dug into this and what my personality type was. There was so much that came to life and challenged me and refined me that that made me believe this is not just a personality test. This truly is a spiritual journey or a soul journey, meaning that it speaks to the deepest level of who you are, your values, your convictions, how you act out of. Now, if you were to get this textbook, this sounds a little bit mystical, but just to put your minds at ease, the Enneagram actually was founded in biblical roots and traditions. There's a wonderful man named... I totally lost his name. Richard Rohr, who has the Christian perspective of the Enneagram, and he takes it back hundreds and a couple thousand of years to truly talk about the beginnings of the Enneagram, and especially as it pertains to Christ and how the church kind of uses it. So it's really, really awesome. The other thing that, of course, this benefits is your professional life. Now, this isn't something that I necessarily give to all my clients, but this is something that I use at least on a very, let's see, what's the word I'm looking for? I use this intentionally to better serve my clients. So I know that if I'm working with a type 3, which is the achieving personality type, I know that the tendency is going to be to create a list of things for them to do, and they're going to do them, and it's going to be perfect. So my job then as a therapist is maybe to slow down the process and to get them back into themselves rather than giving them a checklist of things. You wouldn't necessarily know that if you didn't know their personality type. So this is something that's really important. And of course, if you have questions about this personality test or spiritual journey, I would definitely love to give you more information. This is something I'm very passionate about. I do want to give you one warning. The test takes about 10 minutes. It's 36 questions long. Make sure that you take it at a very kind of calm and peaceful state, not when you've been under a lot of stress, as that can alter your answers. So that's my resource for the week. Really quickly, looking forward to week 4. Would you guys believe that there are no new assignments this week in terms of the variety? Everything that you all will be doing this week is something that you've already done in this class. So perhaps this week you'll feel a little bit more able to breathe and kind of just indulge in the familiarity of our assignments. You will be reading from our Ivy text this week. Of course, you'll be conducting your counseling session with your partner or partners and then completing the client feedback form. You'll be doing your portfolio competence journal, and then we'll be doing another case study and group discussion based off of that. So, one last thing, as I mentioned in an email to y'all, I've created a group board that all of y'all are a part of. It's a place where y'all can post questions, frustrations, comments, clarification, encouragement, etc. This is another way to foster that classroom atmosphere in a more informal way. Of course, I would encourage y'all to be appropriate with your interaction. This isn't a way to take out frustration on individual classmates. This is definitely not a graded discussion board. I will be monitoring it on a weekly basis, and I would encourage you to be doing the same. So, that is where I will leave it for tonight. I hope y'all have enjoyed this lecture. I know that I have really enjoyed continuing to get to know each one of you guys and to just kind of push you in your own individual ways, get you thinking outside of the box, and challenging you and encouraging you to become better therapists and counselors, and hopefully better individuals also. Have a great day. We'll see you later.